Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth episode of OxPod. Today we have Daniel. If you'd like to tell us a bit about yourself.
Hello. Oh, I can see my waveform now.
Yeah,
This is an inside joke for
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah.
listeners. This is the OnlyFans. So I'm Daniel. I got two surnames because I'm Mexican. Um, I studied in the same college as Rick. Um, I I did chemistry for my undergrad back in Mexico, uh, and I decided that I didn't like labs, that I hated them. So I went into, um, I discovered computation on theoretical chemistry, and look at what I needed to do there, and it was more physics, more maths, computing. Uh, so I started learning some of that. Eventually, during my undergrad, I did an internship at Rice, did some theoretical biophysics stuff, proteins walking around, um, and I did a thesis in theoretical chemical physics. Uh, Doing away with some approximation that's very common in theoretical chemistry. It's called the Born-Oppenheimer approximation. Um, Basically, a model to ignore that approximation and to couple electronic states to nuclear movement. And then I worked in fintech for almost a year. Hated it. Oh boy, it was grim. Um, and I decided to apply um, to Oxford after having a very close run-in with being able to work in the US. Uh, didn't happen because visa. Um, but yeah, came to Oxford to do a PhD in material science, modeling defects in metals for fusion energy uh, applications. And I finished last year. Now I'm working in the Department of Scientific Computing, STFC, which is um, it's a branch of the UK Research Institute. They deal with scientific and technological matters. Um, so
Very
yes,
cool. And now that we've lost every listener,
yeah,
and it's
yeah.
just you and me.
That's,
Very,
that's, ah,
very
wow.
cool. So, do you, with respect to the US visa, do you feel like that was a sort of a happy accident, or sort of, or the best thing that never happened to you in a way?
Probably, yeah. Because thanks to that, it motivated me to apply here because it was to work at Wolfram Research, the guys who do Mathematica, um, and yeah, it didn't work out because of the point system that is now adopted by the United Kingdom. Uh, the
Interesting.
same
Interesting.
type of thing, exactly like copy pasted, applied to the UK. Uh, so yeah, I didn't have enough points, so that was a ballot system. I don't really understand it, and it didn't work. So I was like, well, if they want me,
Hmm.
okay, I'll do it. I'll apply to you know to this
No, I
legendary
mean,
university, and all of a sudden, here I was.
interesting. Immigrate to the United States or go to Oxford University. That's yeah. I mean, I feel a bit of the same way because I was in Russia and I completed my first undergrad, and it wasn't precisely what I wanted to do by a long shot. And so I already knew somewhere into my first year that I wanted to apply to a different uni. And so I graduated with good grades, and I applied to the UK through UCAS for a second bachelor's degree. And I applied to, I think, UCL, King's College, St Andrews for a bachelor's and a master's, and then Oxford. And I was in Russia at the time, and I was waiting. I did everything at the last minute. I thought this will be like my practice run, and if I don't succeed, then I'll just try again. Um, and then the results started coming in. St Andrews said no. UCL said no. King's College said no, and Oxford was the
Well,
last one. And I thought, well, surely not. You know, if those prestigious universities won't have me, then what's the likelihood? So I was already thinking I'll stay in Russia and whatever. And then I got in, and it's why. And then I moved to the UK, And once the Ukraine thing happened, I realized that had I not been accepted to Oxford and followed through with my plan to just stay in Moscow and do stand up or something, which would have been surreal, I would likely be in quite the pickle right now. So,
You'd be in jail, or maybe taking a tumble of some stairs. Oh man, I shouldn't.
100%. No, but
I'm
like,
never
yeah,
going
yeah.
to Russia. well,
Is that a
uh,
bad thing? I mean, yeah,
I would say too many jokes and just end up suicided like
yeah,
McAfee.
yeah. Oh God, yeah. Rest in peace. That man was wild. Didn't he have try to have
I
intercourse
don't
with? No, he
know.
successfully had intercourse with a whale at some point. He detailed it in one of his writings how there was some Hawaiian island where people would swim into these deadly currents, and then we've gone from
That's,
material science to
oh
intercourse with
man,
cephalopods. But
he also got pooped on a couple of times.
goodness,
There's a few uh,
it's interesting
interviews
how.
out there.
Oh God,
Oh,
can you
what a
imagine
man.
you? Because usually with Norton and Kaspersky, they build this image of being because it's the same McAfee, right? The guy who
I don't
designed the
know.
antivirus,
Oh well, yes,
isn't
yeah,
it?
McAfee, yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
he's the
That's
antivirus
what.
guy. Which
Yeah,
I mean,
and yet
ironically, those pieces of software are essentially viruses now. Like they just they're terrible. Like I think computer security has gotten to a point where you can just use Windows Defender or uh, I mean, if you go Linux crowd,
yeah,
then I mean you'd have to be a dummy because sudo hate cmod dash x or whatever. I don't remember.
we've
And then
entered the negative number of
yeah,
listeners.
yeah,
They've
yeah.
now.
They're like, oh,
It's
what is
interesting.
this?
No, Linux. I I don't know. Linux and Apple exist on opposite ends of the spectrum with respect to how customizable and how detailed you can get. But at the same time, I was speaking with a mutual friend of ours, Isaac, and
Mm,
who definitely needs to get onto this pod. And
yes.
he was just saying that he doesn't go in for technology much, and thus Apple is really appealing to him because, for instance, with smart home stuff. I'm putting words in his mouth, so I'm sure this is my strategy for getting him
Yeah,
on.
yeah.
I'm going to misrepresent his views, and then he'll get on to that's typical CNN
It's a good
strategy.
strategy, yeah.
But
Spread some fake news about him.
oh god, I'm looking at my peaked waveform. I need to be like 3 times as quiet. Jesus. Anyway, so the point is that he said, with a smartphone for a smart home, for instance, getting the locks and the light bulbs and everything. If you have to set that up with an Arduino or a Raspberry Pi, then that's a week or 2 weeks of
Hmm?
study if you've never done anything like that before. But if you just buy the Apple thing, then there it is.
Here's
And in a
here's
way, I
my
think, yeah.
counter argument.
Go ahead.
Why
Yeah.
why do you need a smart home? I mean, we have keys. We've had keys for thousands of years. Like they work, and now we have the technology to make really good keys and like barrel locks that are essentially lock proof unless you get the lock picking lawyer on your case or something like that. Right? Whereas a bloody like oh, you lose internet connection, all of a sudden you can't go into your house or you can't leave your house. Like,
It's cool,
no, I
but it's
hate that.
cool.
And Apple, they're the worst offenders of just being anti-consumer and just ah. I
But
mean,
that's the whole
I'm sure
appeal of
you've
it. A lot
heard
of
of
the
the.
anti Go,
Is
sorry, go
it?
ahead.
Well, maybe yeah, because people are idiots.
I think part of it is that it's
Damn
this
it!
idea of we'll do it for you, don't worry about it. Just pay the price tag, and our promise is that it will work. And you
But
don't
it
have to worry
doesn't.
about it. You push the button, and then
But like
it would
it
just
doesn't. They
work.
break and then you can't repair it on your own because Apple are like, no, we're capitalist and like you're gonna pay us to
Mm,
repair your shit. Like, no, bro.
mm.
Like same with tractors. Like, come on, John Deere had a big issue on their hands because farmers couldn't fix their tractors and there was legislation passed to allow that because given free reign, that's what they do. And thankfully, I'm sure you've heard of the EU regulation regarding the standardization of like charging ports. Where like, yeah,
I've
you're gonna
yeah.
use there's a bloody standard. It's called the USB, a Universal Serial Bus. It's there for a reason, right? And Apple with their you know ridiculous. Oh no, we gotta be proprietary so that we have DRM on everything. Like, nah, shut up and like do as a reasonable person would do, and have a standardized output so that everyone can bloody use your phones. And it's just, and that was the EU
Yeah.
who did that, and I think they have until 2025, maybe 2023. I don't know. It's fairly recent in terms of like corporate action, where
Hmm.
yeah, they're gonna have to bend over and like do do the right thing for the consumer. That's why I just, oh man, I hate
But
that kind of thing.
But and yeah, I share your sentiment with respect to that. That Apple definitely, like any large corporation, it was will exploit the rules of the game to the
Not only Apple,
to the
like
nth degree.
Tesla does a similar thing. I mean, the Juicero, like what a
Mm.
debacle that was. Like,
Did you
it's
say
just,
what's this about?
did you haven't? Oh man, it's
No, no,
this
no.
juicing thing, and it had some bags, and you would put the bag in, and the bag had DRM, so it had an RFID chip, and it would identify the bag, and then it would press the juice. Um, like, why? What was, and people ate that shit up, and it's just ridiculous innovation with no purpose and just having
Wait, so this is a
zero.
juicer that was
It was
installed
a
into a
juicer,
Tesla?
yeah, yeah. No, 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 no. It was just it was like a tech juicer
Oh,
where like
okay.
it was literally a thing. It was a rectangle, and it just pressed a bag, right? And it had
Interesting.
DRM to press the bag, and the bags were expensive. The Juicera was expensive, and they scammed off so many investors. I mean, like if you're an investor and going to invest on something like that, then it serves you right to lose your money. Like,
Mm, mm.
because
And
why?
well, it brings
It
to
became a
mind.
meme, and like you could squeeze the bag, and you could get more juice out of the bag by just squeezing it than with the Juicera. Like, and it broke all the
Hmm.
time. It's just all
I
this.
feel like in the discourse that surrounds sort of anti-consumer behavior is this underlying assumption that um, all people that use technology have the same sort of relationship to it as people who are Linux enthusiasts. And I think a lot of people are just apathetic. And even if they're aware of the fact that Apple is sort of siphoning us an additional amount, for many people, that's a non concern, either because they're wealthy enough where it doesn't really matter and they can't be bothered, or they just don't care. And I feel like many people who are on the sort of hands on spectrum of technology use um, assume that all consumers could potentially reach that level of interfacing with technology sort of elegantly, and many just don't have that desire. Do you think that it's kind of like pearls to the swine idea that many people just it doesn't well legitimately they might be master carpenters or they ornithologists or some other thing, but to them it's just I use it to call. And obviously there's this sort of underlying assumption that um, well, if these people did take the time to discover the capabilities of more consumer friendly technology and they took control of their data and they were able to use hardware and software effectively, then their life would be sort of more productive. But do you think that's always the case, or are there some people for
No,
whom it
no.
just
I,
wouldn't
I
make a
think
positive
I
difference?
I I don't think so. That like an ultra customizable thing. I mean, look, I program, right, so it's my job. There's um, things that are called IDE, so integrated development environments, and there are some really bare bones ones that have zero features, and they're all completely customizable. And sometimes, I mean, I don't use them, right? I use VS Code, which is, if there's anyone who programs, VS Code is amazing. Um, I think the fundamental, my my the way that I approach things is like, does the design serve the purpose? Right? It's first you have a purpose, and then you make a design to enable that as smoothly as possible. It doesn't matter if it's shiny or like new. In fact, a lot of things that just you innovate for the sake of innovating. It is ridiculous. I mean, the classic example of microwaves. What? How much do you need for a microwave? You need two knobs, power and time. That's it. Meanwhile, you see all these like programmable microwaves. The screen breaks and your microwave's done. And like, why? There's no zero
Mm,
point to that. You could just make two knobs, power, time, and then you say, okay, so if you want, you can give out recommendations. You can put it on the internet. I mean, we already do that. We get bloody QR codes on everything. Like I bought a weight belt because that I lift, but if people, for people who don't know, I partake in powerlifting and calisthenics, and I bought myself a belt to hang weights off of. The thing had a QR code on it. It's like, oh, register the weight. Why? Why? Like, it's just a belt. I'm gonna put it around my waist, take it to the gym with me, and that's it. That's all it needs to do, and it does that
mm.
fine. Why do I need to register it? What's it gonna do?
Ooh. Some people still like style. It's interesting, and I think that in a way, the genius of Apple, I think it was Linus from the tech tips, not from the operating system, that indicated or noted that Apple somehow managed to frame itself as a luxury brand, even though
Oh, they
they're
are. I mean, a
a
phone is
tech
a
producer,
luxury. Like, I
and
mean, come
yet
on, really? A
they're
phone is a
they
luxury.
and yet really they're a tech company. They sell gadgets in a way, and yet gadgets sort of sounds a little bit dorky, whereas iPhone is something shiny and beautiful. Fundamentally, they do the same thing as Alienware and Razer or as Nokia in on a certain level of
Yeah,
analysis,
yeah. They
and yet
they nerd cool.
yeah, they've managed to sort of put a spin on it. And I think that that's often underappreciated by people who have a deep understanding of technology because it's precisely that idea. There's a purpose, there's a function, there's a problem that needs to be solved.
And
But
I can get behind the
mhm.
design. I mean, it does. They look cool, and I've. I mean, when I've used them, I find them clunky. I've always found Apple uh, clunky because I mean, I guess I grew up with Windows, but like I like having a button that's go back or like a button take me home. But Apple doesn't do that.
Yep.
It's like in the UI of the app. Like there's no like universal uh, thing to do that. It's just on every app there is one, and I don't know
Mm-mm.
that to me. But that's a design choice. It's a design choice that I don't like, but it's arbitrary, right? What I mean is like when it's actively inhibiting its purpose and its use. And it's not only Apple. Like you see it in indoors. Like those doors that look super fancy, like glass doors with like a bar, and there's got a bar on both sides. And then you go, well, do I push or do I pull? Like, and sometimes it's just one way, but there's no indication of it. Like if it had a
Mm.
plate on one side, okay,
Yep.
then you push. If it's got a bar on one side, then you pull. It's these types of
Yep.
things, and it drives me so mad.
Yep.
I'm very much function over form. Well, like the form should inform the function. Um,
Mm. And so, changing tack a little bit,
yeah,
you grew up in Mexico.
yeah.
Did you think that when you were a kid or a teenager, did you think you'd be studying at Oxford University? Was that sort of planned?
Bro. So my mum was very diligent with teaching me how to read. So by the time I was 3, I already could read. And I was very curious. I was always um, asking questions. So my dad, uh, to stop me from asking so many bloody questions, he gave me an encyclopedia, like a little encyclopedia. And he was like, well, when you have a question, look that up there first, and then if the answer isn't
Mm.
there, you can come to me. Uh, and he taught me how to use it, uh, and that's kind of that's how I discovered uh, the football, the three states of matter. So before I was four, I knew about plasma, right? And um,
That's
yeah,
iconic.
no,
Before I was four, I knew about
yeah, I was
plasma.
looking at like formulas for volumes, for areas, geometric shapes and stuff, and um, eventually just doing that, I found out about Isaac Newton, and I was like, well, where did he like go? Where did he study? And it turned out Cambridge. And I was like, oh, I'd like to go there. And I was like four. Um, but I, I I wasn't. We weren't poor by any means, but we weren't like super rich. Um, but we did have a house, and it was okay. It was a good life. But there was, if I was gonna end up somewhere like this, I would have needed a scholarship, and I did get a scholarship. Uh, but yeah, since I think I was like 4 or 5 when I found out. There was also Microsoft Encarta, uh, which my dad pirated, and I would browse that for hours, and that's how I found. That's how I found about Isaac Newton, and then Cambridge, and I was like, ooh. And then
Microsoft
obviously with
Encarta.
Oxford,
What
huh?
was this? Was
Encarta.
it micro?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was like a digital encyclopedia. It was
Ooh.
like uh, a Wikipedia, but well, yeah, it's digital encyclopedia. And it was similar to it worked in a way that's similar to Wikipedia. So it had hyperlinks, internal hyperlinks. It wasn't on the internet. Um, it was amazing, and I loved reading that, and still to this day, I mean, very clearly uh, a nerd. Um,
In the best
I
sense of the
like,
word.
yeah, I like that. It's amazing. Um, so that's yeah. Since I was 4 or 5, I think. Um,
And
but
so
I
that was
didn't
your.
think I would get here. I wanted to, um, but
But
I made
hey,
it. So
I
5-year-old
mean,
me
you made it.
would be very very pleased, and 30-year-old me is also very pleased. I'm loving life. Um,
No, that's amazing. And did when you went to sort of middle school, high school, did you sort of what were there points when you thought that it wasn't going to happen? Was there how to what degree did that overarching goal of getting to Oxbridge or a similar institution guide your choices in school?
uh, well, I always liked learning. Uh, Sometimes it was a bit boring because as I said, I was like reading before I started kindergarten, right? So um, at times I was a little bit ahead, but I always liked learning, uh, and so again we had the amazing good fortune that my dad, well, things went kind of awry in Mexico, and my dad needed an escape, and so he looked for um, PhD opportunities, and he found one in the UK, in Bradford, um,
Mm.
famed city of curries and stabbings. Uh,
Oh my god! Shout out to Bradford.
yeah, oh
Stay
man,
safe out
I
there.
haven't visited, but it was so good. So when I was 12, we moved to Bradford, so my dad could do a PhD there. Um, and while I was in school there, I mean, in at least school back in Mexico was so much more uh, difficult. Like the workload was so much bigger than what it was here. So I was coasting, and the teachers were like, "Well, if you can keep going like this, you might be able to like get into one of these legendary universities." And for my school, it was a, a well, it's not a because in the UK public schools are like those private ones. It wasn't one of those. It was like a comprehensive. Uh, so like people from there aren't supposed to go to places like here. So they were like, yeah, you could do this, and that was. very cool to hear. And yeah, I got my GCSEs, and they were really, really, really good. But we went back, um, so it was horrible uh, going back and just seeing, because we went back just in time for the drug war to kick off, um, and it's like just seeing your city implode. Uh, it was grim. So for a while, it was my mission to like come back, um, and it was always like in the back of my mind. Um, I don't even know if I even considered the possibility that it wouldn't happen. I didn't
Oh
want to
wow.
consider it. Like you know, it was what really like uh, kept me going. Of like, I'm gonna get out of this place, and I'm gonna do something with my life.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Wherever. Uh, and yeah, I mean, if it hadn't happened here, it would have been something else. But I wouldn't have stayed. Um,
And so
which
why
is
is
a
it that your family decided to go back from Bradford
oh, I
into
don't
Mexico?
know. My mom actually, and this was in the time before. So currently, you need to stay in the UK for 10 years or work for 5. Back then, you could just stay for 5, and being a student counted for 5. And my mum was like, "Well, we can just stay for one more year, and get permanent settlement, and then um, become citizens." But my dad kind of freaked out because he was on a scholarship that asked you to go back. But I mean, one, they don't do anything. They can't do anything, and two, they're really like um, they don't do what they're meant to. Like they abandoned me, for example, during the pandemic. They stopped. They cancelled my card, so I was without funding, and the Department of Materials actually helped. I was without funding for the last year and a bit of my PhD. Uh, and I remember he had a ton of trouble with them, and I also had a ton of trouble. Um, so he was like, "Oh no, we gotta go back, and I gotta do this." I worked there for a bit and meet the terms, even though they hadn't met theirs with him. He kind of freaked out, and so we went back, and yeah, I think it was a mistake. Um,
Mm.
but you know, it is what it is. And thankfully, I did make it back. Um, and I nothing against Bradford, but like Oxford is amazing. I thought Bradford was incredible, um, but yeah, I love Oxford. I love this place, even though it's
Yeah, it's
expensive and it's full of wankers. But I mean, uh,
yeah, it
I like
is.
it. I like it a lot. It's
It's
quiet.
magical.
Yeah, it's like living in a fantasy novel. Um, and I love. I mean, you can see my Kindle there in the background.
Yeah, yeah.
I love fantasy, man. So it's like if I could live in one of these places that's magical, then I'm doing okay.
Yeah, Oxford definitely is. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Harry Potter movies were filmed at Oxford. And I was reading before that universities, I believe, in Europe in general, were modeled after monasteries.
Mm,
Etymologically, they're related to um, a place where, what is it? People of all places come to one place, and to study intensively, one does need to sort of isolate themselves at the individual level of you have people have studies if they have a large enough house or desks or a place that's devoted to concentrating on the unknown and sort of ascertaining bit by bit how novel information relates to previously known information and building those links. And so Oxford is a sort of architecturally and socially is incredible for that. It's the perfect place to learn in many ways, just because um, administrative issues aside and college rooms aside, in general, it's like fortresses and monasteries where you can sort of focus intensely and not worry about, which is a great privilege, but it's also
Yeah,
a
it
phenomenal
is.
mechanism. It's essential. I don't think there's various reasons why most nations that have universities will keep them outside of the capital, or the most prominent universities. And part of it is to get the political dissonance out of the capital, but also to give you that space to think and to develop without being caught up in sort of routine life. It's a very, I mean, even all
I
of
don't
those
know.
coming of age movies within the US, uh, going to college is this sort of transformative, metamorphic period in one's life.
I don't know. Is it?
I mean, all periods of life are
I,
metamorphic in some way,
I don't
but it's
know.
very sort of vivid and picturesque, and it's also um, a common experience for many people. Whereas the process of professional development is slightly less relatable for film viewers, I suspect.
Yeah, I don't
Or do
know.
you
It's
think it's all
weird.
romanticized?
I
Do
think
you
it's
think that
romanticized. Yeah,
yeah?
yeah. I think it's
Mm,
very romantic. I mean, we've had, you know, suicides in college, right? So it's like,
that's true.
I loved being here, but it depending on the societal and cultural pressures and even like mental illness. I mean, I know like from when I was in undergrad, I was depressed, but it wasn't because of the university. It was because of all the shit that was happening around me. Um, so it's like I don't know. You just gotta. I think it's worthwhile looking at it from the outside and going, this is so surreal, and you gotta try to appreciate and not take it too seriously. That's um, I think the whole pressure of like, oh, you gotta be somebody, and I've been guilty of that too. But having gone through the past 3 years and how they've uh, really just completely changed me, I'm like, well, is it worth it? And I don't know. I don't think so. It's you're better off doing something that you truly enjoy, truly like, and living life for yourself rather than for some expectation of society. But the thing is, like this was me. Like as I mentioned, I wanted uh, ever since I was 4. I was like, yeah, this is like, and no one told me that's what. I had no idea, bro. Like I didn't know that this was so like legendary. I mean, you see the tourists and that people treat you differently. It's and I'm not okay with it. Like here in the UK, you go to anywhere else, and you know it comes up, and it's oh, you go to Lowe's, oh wow, and then like people treat you differentially, and I'm like, I'm no different than anyone else. I was a little dog as a kid. It's like, yeah, this is what like this sounds so cool. Like going and learn uh, to this place of history and uh, magic and stuff. But I guess in some and also I had very supportive parents. Like they did, especially my mum did push and like help and stuff. Um, but there was no. It was like you do what makes you happy, right? As long as you're not uh, hurting, and as long as you're not uh, contributing negativity to the world, do what you like. Uh, and this is what I liked, and I had an amazing time. And I've told you so many times. I tell people that I had such a great time. Um, it's like, and meanwhile, there's other people who are being are miserable. Like, well, then maybe this isn't what. Maybe it's not worth it. And I wish there wasn't such a massive pressure and the awe that people look at you with is so strange. Uh, and I don't like it. It just makes me feel an outsider. I'm like, no.
I mean, in a way, I think one is an outsider to the degree that you're going through an experience that many um, have only heard about or read about or seen. And there's a natural curiosity, the same way that people get about people who have served in the military or done scuba diving or anything else. It's outside of the usual, and in
Yeah,
that respect, I think it's warranted.
yeah,
But when it
yeah.
comes down to
But like when they look at you with
people,
awe,
Mhm.
and I'm like, bro,
that's
come on. Like they
I,
literally people like before coming here. Also, I started lifting, and so all of a sudden I went from being a skinny 50 kilo guy to weighing 80 and like being fairly muscular. And people do treat you very differently. And I've seen it, and it's just like I'm the same person. I'm goofy as hell. I make the same jokes. Uh, Still the same outlook on life. Maybe a bit more mellowed out. Um, but there's a different way that people see you and treat you. Like they speak to me differently, and then I swear, and they're like, "Oh, whoa, what the?" I'm like, "Yeah, bro."
I think
Yeah,
I think part of it is that um, eh, people understand either implicitly or explicitly that it's important to sacrifice your time and your energy in pursuit of something that's meaningful, but it's not immediately apparent either because within society, within school, within the family, um, the kind of altar to a worthy altar to which you should sacrifice your time and energy in your youth isn't clearly it isn't pointed out, and so people look to um, those who have achieved something substantial, and they try to figure out, well, is that the kind of sacrifice that's worthy? And for some, it's aspirational. They think, oh, well, they went through all of these difficult things, and look where they got, and so therefore, because it's a scary thing, you can only do so many things within a lifetime, and sometimes it's more than people expect, and sometimes it's less. But it's painful. It's much easier in the short term to just commit yourself to nothing and never go through anything painful or tiring. And so people want a purpose. They want a reason that can remind them of why they even embarked on this journey on the days that they're tired and sad, depressed, and exhausted. And I think to that degree, it's beneficial that for people to admire others who might be down a path that they're thinking of going towards. The time when it becomes sort of disturbing, or I would say counterproductive, is when people implicitly with their behavior or the way that they treat you somehow want to indicate that you're of greater worth, which is absolutely not the case. If it's sort of this idea that we all have inalienable rights and dignities, and with respect to being a worthy human, we're all the same. But with respect to achievement and sacrifice, I think that having completed a PhD at Oxford, if someone sees that and thinks either, oh, I'd like to do that, or within the thing that I'm pursuing, if it's MMA or fishing or designing telescopes, I think it's useful for us to look at each other and say, hey, man, you put in a lot of work and you figured out a way to even enjoy it on most of the days. Some days it's grueling and some days it's enjoyable. That is something we should celebrate, but it has to be in a healthy way. So I
yeah,
think
but I think
that's
it's more
that's the
like
direction.
where intrinsic is the debate between intrinsic and extrinsic
Extrinsic, yeah.
motivation, where like
Yeah.
you gotta like I'm very intrinsically motivated. Even I mean, yeah, coming to Oxford was just something I wanted to do. Uh, in lifting, and I see it all the time. Like I'm not the strongest. I'm by far not the strongest. I mean, like I do both powerlifting and I do calisthenics, and people go, well, if you focused on one, then yeah, you'd be a lot better. It's like, yeah, but I like going under rings and I like doing back levers, right? I like doing dips on rings. I like doing my pull-ups and like, uh, I like training the iron cross, even though it's gonna screw with my bench. It, and then they asked me, "Oh, well, would you compete?" And I'm like, "Well, I go there every day, and I compete against myself from like a month ago." Um, and it's it's the carrot on the stick versus the carrot that's inside.
Hmm.
And yes,
But sometimes
sometimes
it's
it
difficult to
sucks.
cultivate that.
It is, it is. But that's why you gotta analyze what you really want. Like, it's there's nothing sadder than someone saying, "Well, I'm gonna work, sacrifice my youth, so that I can retire in a fishing village." Well, why don't you go to the fishing village now? What's
Mm.
stopping you? Society? Well, you're gonna you're gonna be rich and then live in a fishing village and have no expenses or very few. Like that this idea of like worth, worth. You get one chance, and like I was a lot more, um, I guess, ambitious and motivated to succeed and stuff. But then, I mean, my dad died in 2019. I broke my hand and stuff, and all this shit happened. And the only thing I wanted, and also during the pandemic when I was left alone, I was one of those infamous single person households. Just 6 months after all this crap happened. Well, it was a year, but I was out for like mentally completely shut down for 6 months. So I had only been getting back for 6 months, and the pandemic started, and I was left alone. And the only thing that I wanted, the only thing, well, there were two things, was I wanted to go lift and I wanted to see my friends. That's it. And that's all I wanted for 7 months, you know? And that put things into perspective. Like, do I really want to sell my soul and like, you know, live in London, get a ridiculously high paying job that contributes nothing to society? Or do I want to live uh, uh, a more comfortable, maybe not as rich life, but a life that I can say, you know what, that was worth it for me, for society, something that I could be proud of, um, and also without sacrificing my so that I don't feel like I'm sacrificing my time, so that I can go lift, I can work, and it's chill. There's not ridiculous pressure. It's like, oh, there's this problem, we don't know how to solve it. Throw ideas at the wall. Uh, and I like that, and it's just so much nicer. And yeah, it kind of going through stuff like that puts things into perspective. And to be honest, like I would trade it all for an afternoon with my dad, all of it. I wouldn't even think about it. So that's again like, was it even worth it? Was it worth leaving? And I would say yes. Um, things you don't realize how important certain things are. Even like mundane things, sitting next to someone without saying anything, bored out of your mind, or high, or whatever you want to be. It's just like sharing something dumb that you wouldn't think of twice. Those are the things that remain. Um, Instead of like chasing, working a shit job that you hate, for buying shiny shit you don't need with money you don't have. And that's a quote from an amazing YouTube channel called "Crime Pays It, But and It Doesn't." Uh, and it's like that quote speaks to me in such a deep way. Um, and I have the privilege of being able to say that, which again is kind of a conflict. Just sometimes you do have to work. Um, and luckily now, I mean, I do work, but I don't have to break my back at it. Um, which is a massive injustice, and I would like to help fix that. So I'm seriously like considering, if I stay in the UK and become get my permanent settlement and then become a citizen, considering like running as a radical left MP. And just say the most
This is the
outrageous
platform.
stuff.
I'm
Like,
giving a platform here.
yeah, bro. Like, just for the betterment of society. And this circles back around to like the shit times of innovation. I mean, look, Tesla, okay, electric cars. Yeah, but we had trams 100 years ago, electric trams. You know, instead of like the personal responsibility of owning a car, whatever, you could just rip up the roads, add some, well, not rip them up, but like get some tram, I don't know, like tramways, tram lines,
Tramline, yeah.
uh, and you don't need as much maintenance, so road tax isn't going to be such a big thing. And I don't know, I've been getting more radicalized in like leftist
Mm,
policies. Like,
mm.
it turns out road tax doesn't pay enough for keeping up roads, so society as a whole subsidizes that. Like, we as society are poorer because we rely on cars so much. If you could have good public transport, and yeah, it would be more expensive in the short term, but in the long term, it's going to be way cheaper. You could give people £7,000 cargo bikes. You know, they're worth 7,000 quid. Electric cargo bikes once a year, and it would still be cheaper than them owning a car.
Hmm. Interesting.
Like,
There's so much that
it,
uh that's well on the topic of privilege. Sorry, you wanted to say something?
oh, no, 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 and yeah, this would level things out, because I mean, cars are expensive, things like that, and also like the toll they take on your health. And not only cars, but having a just this endless mill, and the way that we design cities. Like, my dad, he was an architect, but in the end, he got interested in urbanism and like urban design. How do we make cities more amenable to people instead of machines? Um, and so having a city that's meant for people. Uh, but not only that, I mean, Oxford, we already have that because we live in like just a bubble that is so incredible. But why shouldn't everyone? Right? We can do that. You know, you don't need suburbs. You don't need the fucking cultural deserts that mansions and stuff like that. And I see the UK going that way. And I mean, the US is already like that. I yeah, I don't know. Same with it, just builds a community. And again, going through the pandemic and being alone, what did I want? I wanted to exercise, and I wanted to have a community. Um, and yeah, these are things of privilege, but do they have to be? I don't think so. Um, I think
I
we
mean,
can.
precisely that. Often we say with privilege that, or less frequently now, and I think that's a positive development. Initially, I think privilege by many was touted as this idea that you should be ashamed for things that you enjoy that aren't necessarily deserved or earned. However, if one is bestowed a privilege of any kind, I think that the more effective or adaptive response is to think, okay, well, I have this thing, and uh, arguably it isn't something that I worked 10 years to attain. What good can I then do? People who are endowed with massive privilege of any kind, I think the correct response is, rather than just bemoaning it, which helps no one, because then you're miserable and other people are miserable, is to then say, okay, I'm going to rise to the challenge. I've been given this privilege, perhaps arbitrarily, and now I want to become deserving of it. You're not necessarily, if you're undeserving at some point, whether that's by an external assessment or more effectively an internal assessment, the best thing to do is to then change one's behavior and to think, well, how can I make use of all of these resources to then do something beneficial for the world? Yeah. Whether you're not, you're given a certain set of cards and you think, oh, these cards are fantastic, well, then you can do something with that. You can get all your chips and give them to everyone else, or use them in a creative way. And I think that's all of guilt should only be. I think it's good to be guilty, and shame can be very positive to the degree that it forces someone to self-reflect. I don't think that it's effective for one person to shame another because
Yeah,
before we get on to,
well,
there's a lot to look inside.
sometimes I think there's a,
Yeah.
the Tories should be ashamed, for example. That we should shame them.
But I think it's most effective when uh, every person goes and does some introspection, especially at the times when it seems least convenient or least desirable. There's a million things that each of us could be doing better, and in a way that's daunting, but in a way it's really hopeful. That's incredible because if you think, oh, there's 100 things I'm doing wrong, and 80 of them I don't even know I'm doing wrong. If I start with the first 20 and then I expand to the remaining 80, things could be incredible for me and for you and for everyone. And I think increasingly dialogue around the idea of people being in a position of privilege has shifted in that direction. And I think it's really positive. I mean, you said it yourself. You had this interesting combination of you had innate curiosity and you early on you had this thirst for knowledge and you were intrinsically motivated and you also had the support of your parents and so but then your conclusion is rather than saying, "Oh, I get to live in the paradise of Oxford," because paradise means walled garden, and it is a walled garden.
Yeah,
Rather than saying, "Oh, I'm I'm so privileged, woe is me," the conclusion that you've come to is to say, "Well, I want to figure this out and make use of it, and then expand that and scale that to other people." And I think that's phenomenal. I think that's what at at the best of times throughout history, when people have said, "I have this really good thing," how about I figure a way to make more of it or give more of it out? That's always been, well, with some caveats, that's been a path towards um, just a cooler world, one that's good. There's that great phrase that Chappelle has in one of his specials when he says, "And then you'll be big, and I'll be big, and we'll all be big." It's a simple idea, but I think it's it's worth pursuing.
yeah,
The other thing you mentioned was public transport. I think that's an interesting dialogue because um,
bro, I
people
would run
vary in
on
their
that platform
personalities.
so hard. I
Well, that's the
I
thing
would
that
say that just the most radical shit. Ban all cars. Just give people like sick cargo bikes. Give them like covers and stuff. Like make them electric, all of it, and it will still be cheaper than maintaining all the roads and cars. And, oh man,
but do you
I'm
think that
so
everyone would be on board with that?
no. Oh god, no. Are you two
And
are kidding me, man? But that's not the point. You see, I would never win any. Like, there might be some, uh, and not me. Like, I wish there was someone who stood for that kind of thing, who just made the noise, right? Like, who stood for something, like something good. We all know the world is going to shit. Like, bro, we were at 38 degrees here in Oxford in July. I came out of the gym and I felt, whoa, like this feels like home. Because my hometown is a tropical savanna, right? It does get to 38, 40 degrees in just ridiculous humidity. And it was like stepping out of a coach into the air of my hometown, just hot, humid. Um, and I looked at that and I was like, there's something wrong here. Like my hometown has alligators and coral snakes. Do you see snakes here? No. But
there's a joke in there about the Tories, but I'll abstain.
well, aside from all of that, yeah, I wish there was someone who just said these things. It's like, oh, what a madman! But honestly, it would work. Like having trams, we had trams. Like we ripped them up. Um, London used to have trams. And I think that's eventually they made the underground for the same purpose and for delivering stuff, mail. They still have a
Yeah, there's
little
the mail underground.
mail,
It's
yeah.
very cool. I want
And
to go see it.
people
Yeah.
say, well, you can't do that. You can't like uh, send your Amazon package to your house or whatever. Well, yes, you can. Just have a small like you can have a switch, can't you? Like, um, but even then, just go to the bloody depot. Like, we have the technology. Amazon's already done it as well. But it's just the I think it's the myth of personal responsibility and individualism, and just ignoring the fact that we are obligate. One, we're obligate tool users, and two, we're obligate communal animals. We cannot live on our own. Maybe there's some
Well, I
savage
would
out there who lives in a shack in the forest all by himself, but I mean, they've got stuff that were made by other people, you know. Um, so it's we are not an individual species, and I think the whole thing has shifted, and the myth of like personal responsibility, and you gotta own a car, and you gotta have your own whatevers, and again, it's shiny shit you don't need. Like, do we need it? No. Um, but the thing is,
I would
cities have
add to that.
evolved to require them. Thankfully, Oxford is very cyclable, but you go to Birmingham or you go to Southampton, and it's sprawling cities that it's hard without a car. Uh, but I think we did it wrong. We got it wrong, and we got it wrong for the weather. We got it wrong for ourselves. Um, and
Well,
we
with respect to the weather, I think that there's a
we
lot in what you said that I agree with wholeheartedly. But the two things that come to mind, I think the first one to mention is that people have different personalities that are somewhat almost down to a nature nurture sort of interweaving of there's genotypes that determine certain personality traits, and then whether or not they get activated in an environment is a different one. So there's something there. People, there's a natural sort of normal distribution of all sorts of personality traits. And in the post Enlightenment world, we implicitly, even non scientists, behave in a way and speak in a way as if there does exist a unified objective reality that exists beyond the limitations of individual perception. That, peer reviewed studies and or
I mean,
replicable experiments. There's this idea that there exists a sort of platonic dimension that's parallel to the biased world that we see in a simplified way. But I think that that view is immensely useful, and it's allowed us to build suspension bridges and jet engines and heart surgery equipment. But one of the sort of subjectivist view, although it has the danger of it is to fall into this sort of solipsistic, nothing matters, everything is relative um, goo. That's not very useful. But I think it is useful to remember that because of people's different personality traits, let alone their upbringing, people do see the world in fundamentally different ways. And so something that seems, it's not just that they have a different opinion, it's that, for instance, within sort of like the big five model that a lot of people make noise about in psychology and psychometrics, people who are more conscientious and people who are less conscientious, they walk into the same room, and for one person it looks cluttered, and the other person, it's not that they don't care about the clutter, they don't see it. They don't even have that negative affect response. They see a pile and they think that's an effective way. It's all there. I can, they put the books on the floor. There's a lot of students at Oxford that just lay their textbooks out on the floor.
my
And they
room.
think, yeah,
I
and
mean,
it's not
it's
that,
not dirty,
yeah.
but it's
And I think
my clothes are just on my hanging ragged.
precisely, and that sort of goes in. That's orthogonal to the objective rationalist view of the world, and I think that both are valid. It's kind of like, what political party do you want ruling a country? Well, do you want the brakes and the do you want a car with brakes, or do you want a car with gas? They both serve a purpose, although it's a different matter altogether as to whether or not one or the other has become pathological. But I think that fundamentally the reason that so many modern nations have two-party or three-party systems is because it's not just a question of if only we could educate these masses and then they'd see the light, or if only we could have a long discussion and then they'd see the light. There's a bit of that for sure, but another one is that just like a high conscientious and low conscientious person will see a room differently. The idea of politics, not in the power hungry sense, but in the way of how do we structure our society in a way that benefits everyone effectively. Well, the problem there is different people have different ideas of what's beneficial, and different people have different attitudes towards how much one person should pay for the benefit of another. And that's not just a question of right and wrong. I think it's a question of personality and disposition. And it's useful. It would be so boring if we all had the same opinion. It would be inane if we all had the same attitude and personality. But and I think that one of the primary issues is that political discourse in the West has become very sort of zero sum, where it's
You're either
uh,
with me or against me.
and
Kind
it would
of.
and because of the way that most it's not ranked voting, but it's just it's not effective to split a party into moderate left and extreme left, because then you split the vote and the conservatives win. And it would be better, I think, if we had some party that was able to integrate people from different personality traits, and we had an integrated view. And that's very difficult right now. It's in turns. It's you go and then I go, and then you go and then I go, and then you sort of it's two steps forward and two
Has
steps
a
back.
tribalism. I don't think
But
you're gonna.
fundamentally, I think I try to remind myself that there are people in the world who intrinsically see the world in a different way and on a certain sort of level. And that's okay. And it's useful. Some people are extroverts and some people are introverts. And in the social setting, we all accept that. And we wouldn't say to someone who's introverted, oh, you should keep on going out and that's what would recharge you because that's what works for me. But then when it gets to these hyper complex levels of infrastructure and energy and education, there's just so many people involved. It's very easy to forget that yes, there's people who are misinformed or who have
But there are
a
some
malevolent
objective
agenda.
truths in a lot of these
Mm,
things. For example, what
mm,
Jacob Rees-Mogg said yesterday, that there are Putin allies don't want fracking, and I mean, like, come on, man, that's objectively false. Like, I think Russia's number one export is oil, and number two is gas. Like,
yeah,
where do you
yeah,
think you get it from? Like, if it's not the deep sea, it's gonna be fracking now. Uh, you know, this there are some objective uh, truths. More exercise is good.
that's undeniable. Yeah,
More um, being sat down is for long stretches of time is bad. Being in a car, I mean, it's known, like, emissions are bad. Um, so I think it's just, one, it's power. Two, it's I got mine, so fuck everyone else. Uh,
yep.
Preserve what you have at the expense of everyone else. And I was thinking of this the other day. Like, I went on a walk with a friend, and these we saw these massive houses, and I'm like, well, how, bro? Like, I'm never gonna be able to afford one of these things. And then I go thinking, like, well, didn't I mean, wasn't there was a period in history where people just showed up somewhere and, like, this is mine now, this land is mine, and then you make laws to make that law to enshrine that in this protected system where you just walk right up to someone and literally just declared something as yours, and there's nothing they can do about it. It's like, nah, fuck you. Like, what if I walked into, like, Parliament and this is mine? I live here now. You can all, work for me if you like. If you don't, then, we'll just torture and kill you all. It's fine. That wouldn't fly.
Yep.
And I was
Yep.
thinking, and then all of a sudden, a lot of the things that when I arrived in Oxford, it was so jarring, the whole, like, decolonization thing, and it suddenly it's like, oh well, that makes sense. I can see that, because I was under the illusion there was some way of uh, at least little bit easier social mobility, and I've moved up in the world so much, but then there's, like, all of this, and it's pretty much unattainable for most people if you
And
don't
do you
know the
think that
right
that's human
people. Huh?
malevolence, or is it? Do you think that that's systematic, or that
Oh
it's
yeah,
human
of
malevolence at
course
the
it's
individual level?
systematic. It's
Well,
systematic,
as in,
but
is it possible to design a system which counteracts individual malevolence? Would be, or at least doesn't amplify it.
yeah,
It's a
yeah,
very
yeah,
heady
yeah. You
thing,
can.
but
I think you can.
mm,
Um, and the other nice example is well, the Queen died, didn't it? And turns out she lobbied the government so that she could keep a lot of her assets secret. I mean, like, well, what's this woman so beloved by so many? And I'm like, she was 96 and she died. Oh wow, what a surprise! Like, oh no,
That's true. That's true.
96
She
year old
enjoyed the
woman.
full extent of her youth.
That's so
Yeah.
fucking hell. And I started seeing all this stuff, and I'm like, well, damn. So that you present something to the world that is so it's just not genuine and not it's just completely dishonest.
I think it's a
It's,
symbol. People adored her as a symbol, and often people are
yeah,
able
yeah, but
to
it's just
disassociate between the person and the figurehead. And in that respect, she was quite effective, because I said it
I
before.
I would
Um,
I would have switched
sorry, go ahead.
positions with the Queen any day. Fuck yeah.
Hmm.
I'd be that
I
symbol.
don't know. I don't know.
I
I
would
feel
love
like
it. I'd love it the government to keep my assets secret so that
that's
they
true.
couldn't take them away back to wherever they got stolen from. Right? This
Yeah,
whole
that's.
so much kindness and so well okay, but then why this? And you can see these things, the HMRC, and if you put a freedom of information request, you can find them. Um, so it's like really this
I think
is
it. I
it's
think it
just
comes
so
back to
double
purpose.
double face.
The I mean, ever since the sort of, I mean, pre-Nietzsche, there's been this Europe, for hundreds of years, had this uniting structure that said this is what's meaningful, this is what your purpose is, and there were dissenters and there were people who were passionate enough about scientific pursuit or anything else that were able to sort of
No,
craft their
scientists
own
were mostly
purpose.
nobles. Even today,
Mm.
scientists is the people who have the privilege of being in school for bloody 20 years of their lives.
As
Like
yeah, yeah.
it's true. Like I what all primary schools were 6 years, and secondary schools another four, then two like sixth form. So that's what 12, then four, well, 3 or 4 from undergrad, then another 3 or 4 post grad. Uh, like that's a long
It's a long ass
time,
time.
and
Yeah.
you can only do that if you have the back. If you don't have to like provide, right? It's and it's still around, and I could do that because I was in that position. And there are people who I've met who have been just hardworking and brilliant, and they would never be able to. And it's just it doesn't sit right with me. And like it's just um, it's so unfair. Um, 'Cause I didn't do much to be in the position. I did take advantage of the opportunities, and um, but that's also one of the reasons. And it's not the guilt. It's like I want others to be able to have the same opportunity. Um, but yeah, the whole it's just all back to luck of the draw. Uh,
Well, to what degree do you think it would be? I think I've floated this idea with you before. It was something that I had a keen interest in for several months of exogenously heightening people's, if not their intellectual capacity, then certain cognitive functions that we associate with intellect. So Neuralink was sort of a high profile
oh
example, and
bloody
there's a lot of other technologies.
Elon
That
Musk!
one's
I hate the guy.
moving aside from that. But there's kernel, there's external solutions that are non-invasive, there's internal ones. But I think the fundamental idea across all of these startups and large companies is, would it be
It's
a
just gonna
good
be for rich
idea?
people. They're not
Well,
gonna do it
glasses
for
were originally for the
everyone.
rich,
I
and
mean,
then, well, it's a quick.
all
Mhm.
the Silicon Valley is overtly racist, sexist, xenophobic, and even though with diversity, yeah, I mean, come on, if you're Indian or white, if you're a highly educated Indian man or white man, that's it. And like, it's the example,
Well,
the shining
no.
example is Elon Musk, right? But oh, the meme lord, the edge lord of Twitter and stuff, and it's 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 just for the elite. They're like that. Teslas aren't cheap. They're they're bloody expensive. Oh, you get a government rebate and stuff. Like, it goes back to, well, guess what? We could have trams, and they would be much cheaper
Hmm.
instead of something that runs on a battery. The Hyperloop Tesla, yeah, Elon's Hyperloop idea. You know what we call that? The tube. But instead of being in a more efficient, space efficient way of having a train, it's individual pods with zero redundancy. Like, that shit is for the people who can say, yeah, I can afford this because I'm in the position to do so, and all of you plebs, you can go on your buses, but I'm gonna go on my hyperloop, and like, if one car breaks in front of me, I'm fucked.
Yes,
I'm
yeah,
gonna
yeah.
be
There's,
stuck
I think there was a
in
video
a
of
vacuum.
just
Yeah, exactly. People have
the
done, because it's just one track,
what
right?
what comes to mind is that in when I was studying in Russia for 4 years, we it was a big deal as to whether or not you had to sit at the front or the back.
Mm,
Firstly, there were a lot of guys who were only getting a degree so that they wouldn't have to be enlisted for a year. Because if you do a 4 year bachelor's and a 2 year master's, then you become an officer in reserve, and you don't have to get sent to a random part of Russia for a year. And so some people are in the higher education system in Russia with absolutely no interest in higher education, and
mm,
it's not very. And then professors have this moral dilemma where if they have this disinterested guy that's just sitting in the back of the lecture room like eating Cheetos, if you fail him, you're potentially sending him off to Syria at the time. Um, and so when I was in my academic group, and also during seminars, it's sort of a Q&A, and teachers will grade you by just asking you on the spot. There's about 30 people, and a lot of people would just get into arguments about who gets to sit at the front and who gets to sit at the back, and this is my spot, and yada yada yada. And I said, well, how about I just create an Excel thing that a spreadsheet that I'll share with the group chat, and we'll track who's been sitting at the front and who's been sitting at the back, and we'll assign a point system, and then if you can either pay it forward or rack it up in advance. So if you sit at the front for 3 weeks, then you then have the privilege of sitting back and you can exchange it. And as I outlined this, someone just interrupted me and said, no one's going to do that. That's too complicated. Let's just keep arguing. And I realized at that point that on the one hand, social change is never comfortable, and it's always seen as impossible until it becomes inevitable. But a system should be as simple as it. And I mean, you know this far better than I do with respect to engineering, but things should be, what was the Einstein quote? Things should be as
well,
simple as possible, but no simpler. And
I
often,
don't know, but yeah, that's a again, it's a one of the design principles of, you gotta, yeah, it has to serve a purpose, and it should be as simple for the purpose as it could be, because the more moving parts you have, the more that can go wrong, and the more it can be exploited. Um,
mm,
yeah, and
I
that's
mean,
the
a hopeful
whole,
outlook is probably better, though.
huh?
It's probably better to be hopeful about that one day we can get the trams to work than to
But
just
that
sort of
is
come into
much
the cynical
simpler.
thing of
Oh
let's
yeah,
just not change
no,
anything. Yeah,
exactly. And that's,
yeah.
I think that's a lot of the innovation, is to make things more complex for the sake of making them more complex. And I mean, another good example would be Team Trees and Team Seas. The thing that, I mean, well, maybe Team Trees is a little bit better, but Team Seas, with like the whole garbage collection of the surface. The surface is like, I don't remember if it's like 0.1% or 0.01% of like the bulk of the trash, and like, that's all they're trying. And within what they can do in a year, we're doing in a day. Like, we're throwing out in a day. So it's like, is it really doing anything, or is it just all for nothing? Right? Instead, you could use that money and put it in sewer nets. Those things can actually do something about it, and they're much cheaper. You can just put a big net in a sewer. Every, I don't know, 3 or 4 days, you change it, and bingo! Like, you've stopped all this trash from getting into the ocean. But no, you send out a little raft to collect at a very low density, um, uh, yeah, like very low garbage density out in the middle of the Pacific or somewhere where you have fuel costs to get there. There's time costs and obviously the density. And what happens when it's full? You know, you can't simply just take a big truck or a train to the sewer where it like leaves and just pick the trash back up. You gotta go all the way back, and so like all of those emissions, they're still but we can use solar panels. Yeah, but you could also
People like a
just use a
story.
net.
People like a story more than they'll admit to.
Like
We have
it's the shiny
people. I mean,
shit you
like,
don't need.
yeah.
With money you don't have.
But it's a serious problem because, um, I mean, what is it? 3 Mile Island was where the nuclear power station in the US had a failure, and then
Mm.
Chernobyl, and even though nuclear energy on paper sounds like a phenomenal deal, especially for countries that don't have seismic activity, I think that we in the age of science we often forget that all of us without exception need a story, and some people gravitate towards a better story, and some people gravitate towards a worse one, and they're not always aware of one, and they're not always willing to admit that they want one. We all want something to believe in, and saying that you can exist in this sort of space where you just believe in rationality and you're never going to gravitate towards any sort of idol. That's really cool to say, but that's like saying that you don't need to breathe oxygen. Whether or not you feel good about saying it, eventually your face is going to go blue. And so I think that part of the solution to all of these issues with respect to inoptimal solutions is recognizing that people love a good story and they do love spin. It's just like the iPhone, it's just like nuclear energy, it's just like public transport. A lot of people in a discussion will say, yeah, absolutely, you should be big and I should be big and we'll all be big. But then they look at a Ferrari and they think, oh, that would be good. And it's being able to resolve those two, to put a spin on that which is useful,
So that you can
to put a
drive it
spin
at
on something that's
40 miles
valuable.
an hour around the city.
Well, public transport could be cool. I guess the Hyperloop, either nominally or truly, that's a question that only the brain of Musk truly knows. But I think that was sort of the tagline of making it cool. But and that's a problem because the people who are best at putting on spin are the snake oil salesmen. And too often the people who have done the due diligence to figure out the optimal solution with respect to human well-being are not very good at spin because they're used to just giving an honest account. And I think that those two things need to meet in the middle. We need someone
Yeah,
who has the spin of a Tory, but the values of a Labour politician put together. And that's a
does
hard
Labour even
sell.
stand for anything anymore?
These are these are good questions.
Like it's
These are good.
just whiffle waffle. It's like, oh yeah, whatever was
They
gonna
don't
win.
have
It's
any
like, God
spin.
damn it!
They don't have the spin, and they need the spin.
It's
And the spin seems deceptive, and maybe it is. But the problem with putting on a show is that you have to have some level of confidence that what you're doing is meaningful. And it's like, who are you to say? And perhaps somebody who's actually done modeling, computer computational sort of work to figure out that yes, this policy would be better. That's when they can start
yeah, but then
sort of.
they just
Yeah.
assign their mates as education secretary and climate secretary and whatever. What is Jacob Rees-Mogg? Is he like climate or something? Oh, like come on, man! Like Liz Truss, he couldn't spell. Come on, like education, really?
Well,
God
here's
damn!
one. Do you think that I'm going to get in this is going to be a spicy one,
Oh
but do
yes.
you think it was I was reading Factfulness, interesting book, massive recommend. It's from a Swedish doctor who worked around Africa,
Mm.
traveled the world, and discovered that even members of the UN General Assembly have no no knowledge of publicly available statistics from the World Bank on sort of women's education, whatever. But when he was fighting the Ebola pandemic, sorry, well,
Oh, is
epidemic
this that
pandemic,
guy?
yeah.
Uh,
Well, yeah, he
yeah, yeah,
mentions that
yeah.
he was speaking with the CDC in the US, and he said, "Well, actually, the data that you're trying to present isn't entirely accurate. It's not as bad, but it could be bad. So let's just be honest and forthright, and then we'll get a better sort of outcome." To which the CDC said, or some representative, "People won't buy into that. We have to hype it up, otherwise people won't react." And so that's a question
I
of,
think
is
that's
it right, for
self-perpetuating.
instance, for
I
yeah.
think that's self-perpetuating. Well, like you're now so used to just everything being like breaking news, sensationalized news is like it's 24/7, and you're like, so now you need something like to grab you, right? Like it's if we had been as a society like more honest and more careful, instead of and it goes back to just I guess late stage capitalism of like just we need the views and we need the money for to buy shiny shit we don't need to just it just becomes a screaming match. And it's like who can get your attention for the longest time in the most outrageous way so that they can get the most engagement. And it's stupid and ridiculous. I mean, the to a point they don't care if well well this you see this more on Instagram and like TikTok where like even if the information you're presenting is just trash and people call you out on it, that's still good because it just generates traffic as an algorithm and therefore money. And that's the same. It's the same way that all this the news works. It's like more traffic, more outrage. The bro, I had a cousin, have a cousin in Texas. He was telling me like, oh yeah, what would you do if like the roving gangs of and he was like and of trannies like coming to your house and I'm like who's doing that like
Yeah,
come on man
I've noticed that
like who
in the
does
discourse
that
that
like
there's
roving
this
gangs
idea.
of
Yeah,
transsexual uh people just gunning down really
that's how people think on
it's
both
like
extremes. They have this mental image of the enemy, and the enemy is armed
you
because
know
that's how I guess we
oh
developed.
man
It comes back to tribalism of you build up the enemy to be this awful, inhumane thing, and then that's a defense
it's just
mechanism
like
because you feel
who goes into your
and
house as a roving gang and shoots you?
and the reason and I think that comes back to the idea of purpose. Some people derive purpose from the good fight against that, and I think that's why we need to be more concerned about um, not necessarily shoving certain value systems down people's throats, because for one, that usually has a rebound effect. But one of the merits of organized religion, although it's become insufferably corrupt now, in my limited estimation, I'm not a specialist by any
I
means,
hate religion.
is that at some point in its development, the purpose was to say these things are worthy, these are virtues, and these are sins. And sin means sort of in archery, it means to miss. And those things aren't necessarily. We take it for granted that things like we say greed and sloth, although uh, it'll come back to me. One of the sins we now use pride. We now say, and I don't mean that in the disparaging sense, but we tell each other you should be proud of your achievement. And I went on this whole etymological journey of finding old translations of the Bible to figure out whether or not the Hebrews actually distinguished between good pride and bad pride. It's a weird. I went down a long rabbit hole, and I think the original translation isn't the word pride. It meant being satisfied with yourself when you didn't do something worthy.
Hmm.
Regardless, it wasn't a perfect system like anything created by humans, and it's obviously sort of in disrepair now with respect to most religions. But I think Nietzsche was right to a degree in saying that some people in the post religion world will just create their own value systems of saying that being authentic and being honest and working hard and having friends and powerlifting, some people will naturally gravitate towards a better value system and some people won't. And the worst thing is that many who are obsessed with power or simply who are malevolent and enjoy power for its own sake, they know that there are many drifting people who don't have a fixed value system. And so they implant value systems in others, and that's how you get people to participate in their own misery. And I think that the symptoms of bad value systems. Sam Harris had this whole idea of the moral landscape, that you have this sort of 3D structure, and some value systems represent this sort of peak, and some are a saddle. And by some semi-objective criteria, you
I like
could
this mathematical
assess value
description
systems.
of value systems. I was like, yeah, you got a saddle point, and You can
Well,
slide down one way
well, precisely. And I mean,
or slide
the
the other.
existentialists the existentialists had an idea that it's not enough for something to be true and verifiable. It has to be a livable truth. You can make a very compelling case for nihilism that's very rational, but then if you try to live according to those precepts, you're miserable. A few people can pull it off, but optimistic nihilism, but most can't. And so we just sort of now live in a world where everybody's free to pick their own value system, and there's merit to that. You know, you can believe in the heliocentric model without somebody threatening to burn you on a cross. But I think we've gone too far, and I wish that schools promoted, or some um, institute promoted, the idea of these things are valuable and it's not immediately apparent. It's not immediate. For instance, with exercise, I'm only now sort of coming around to it, but it's not immediately apparent that being exhausted and eating more and going to a different place that's unfamiliar and feeling self-conscious, to do all of that
You don't have
effectively,
to
you
do
have to
that.
you have to
That's
believe.
one way. Uh, you know,
Mm.
you could
But you
just
have to
buy some
believe that it's
rings and
worth
they're
it.
just hanging off on a. Yeah, you do. You do. Uh,
And that's some people are able to just sort of cotton on to that, or they give it a go out of curiosity, and then down the line they figure out, oh whoa, this was worth it. But that's, and I think the same with the Queen. A lot of people derive purpose and meaning, and they feel lonely and sad, and they feel like they're this person full of problems that they'll never be able to solve. And then they looked at the Queen and they thought, but everything's going to be okay. And getting people to find value systems that aren't immediately gratifying but then lead to a more purposeful life, and that's a difficult task, because it's better if you find it yourself. But what if you don't? What if you don't get there in time, and someone says, oh, the real way to derive purpose is to find this group, be it ethnic or religious, and kill all of them? And then people feel like their life is full of purpose. We need purpose just as much as oxygen, if not more. And yet no one in sort of Western society is truly concerned, besides religiously dogmatic people, about how do we get people to have better value systems that make them
and
happier
there,
and
there
make
is there
them
is a
help
value
others.
system. It's work. Earn money, work, be successful. It's like that's again. It goes back to extrinsic versus intrinsic. Those are all extrinsic. Who
Mm.
tells you you're successful? You don't say I'm successful. It's in comparison to, oh, monkey has more than that monkey. Me monkey doing better. Fuck yeah, success.
Do you think that you always had such an authentic sort of
uh,
outlook, or was there a point when you started to develop it? Because clear, I mean,
I
everything you
think
said
I always was
earlier
like
on
as a kid. It was
connects to that.
more. Um, it's more like, yeah, I want to be successful, but the thing is, I didn't really know what success. Well, as a little kid, success would have been, coming to Oxford and like, or not even that, just learning, keeping learning and staying, uh, questioning, and that is success. And then you get polluted with like all of this garbage. Oh, you need a car and like blah blah blah, all this shit. And yeah, I would like to have a house and stuff, and I like having some things, but bro, I sleep on tatami mats. I mean, look at them. I love that shit. Like they're so. I mean, they're kind of uncomfortable, but I like that. And that to me, that right there is success.
Mm.
It's being happy, um, satisfied. Yeah, there are some things I'd like, some more shiny shit that I don't need that would be cool. But is it really like is it cooler than going outside and smelling flowers? No. And I mean, I don't know if you've seen me. I like to smell flowers. Uh, and it's just people look at you weird and like, nah, I'm smelling the flowers, and you can walk right by and look at me oddly, but I'm I'm having a grand old time. Um,
There's an incredible
that's
passage in the
success.
narrative of the. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, 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 that's fine. That's just.
There's
I think success
the,
is being true to yourself, more
that's
than
that.
true to society and true to anyone else. It's being true to yourself.
There's this, to that, connecting to that point, in the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, which is I imagine you're familiar with it. It's this sort of It's a story of an African American slave who taught himself how to read and write and escaped from the South, and then became was a part of the abolitionist movement in the States.
Mm.
Then he traveled to the UK and came back, and he wrote not just his, and he kept on sort
Wait,
of
was he the
at
one
these
who became a
abolitionist meetings.
lawyer?
Um, that
I
I'm not
might be
sure
thinking
whether or
of
not he went into
something
law,
different. Well, I mean, as in like kind of like a
but
folk law,
ah,
maybe not like formal. Um,
but
I don't
within his
know.
passage, and it just what you said made me think of it. He mentions that he has this quote where he says, "I would rather be ridiculed by others than to become contemptible to myself." And I
Yes.
think
Uh,
that's and it's sometimes difficult because there's 10 people that are all saying that what you're doing is ridiculous, but they only see you for a couple hours at a time, whereas you're always watching yourself. You watch yourself 24/7. And so if you're contemptible to yourself, then that's, even if people
that's
are
such a
applauding
good
you,
quote,
it's a big
and
recommend,
it's
because the reason it's called the narrative is because he kept on telling his story at these meetings, and eventually he fashioned it into not just the life of Frederick Douglass but the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass. He makes a political commentary about how brutal slavery is and how it turns even the enslaver into a beast. It both people in that situation become these distorted versions of themselves. The system itself perverts the soul, but he also talks about his own life, and he does the two, and it's a fascinating read. It's a massive recommend.
what's it called? The narrative of Frederick Douglass.
The narrative of the life
Narrative of the
of
life.
Frederick Douglass. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, it's
Yeah, I mean it's true. Like, and you know how I am. That's kind of how I conduct myself. I don't care.
and what advice would you have for someone who might be listening to this and then thinks that perhaps they're still buying shiny shit that they don't need, and they're still stuck on the treadmill
That's
of
not
sort
my
of
quote. You know,
yeah.
it's a very good YouTube channel recommendation. Crime pays it, but and it doesn't. So recommended.
Crime pays but it
Yeah,
doesn't.
yeah, it's
Hmm.
amazing. What advice? Uh,
Yeah. How do people, if people begin to suspect and they're getting uncomfortable and they're thinking, oh, you know what, maybe if I really take a hard look at myself, I don't belong to the group yet of the authentic. It's painful, but that's the truth, or it might be. What's the first step? What's your recommendation?
hmm. Stop trying uh to live by someone else's values. I mean, again, as long as you're not hurting uh, and actively contributing to the destruction of fairness in society and uh, all that is good, uh, it's it doesn't matter. Like, we're all gonna die. You're not gonna like. What's the point? Uh, and the thing is, and to bring back some other piece of media, Everything Everywhere All at Once. It's a film about nihilism, and that nothing really matters, but that's the beauty of it. Because nothing really matters. You matter. And you matter to yourself, you matter to those around you, those who love you, and that's um that's really it. You gotta live true to yourself, and it might be hard. There might be expectations, but fuck those expectations. Like, whatever. And again, this goes back to the type of music that I like, and I'm a metalhead, and I like punk music too, and it's okay to be an outsider, it's okay to be weird. I'm so strange. As I mentioned, I like smelling flowers. I visited a friend a week ago, and I got to the city, Guildford, and do you know what I bought? I bought myself some milk, and I bought some raspberries, and I was eating those, walking down the street, and people looked at me weird, and I'm like, yeah, dude, like, I'm having some raspberries and milk. Like, is this so out of, like, uh, that's what I like. Um, and it doesn't matter what people say. It doesn't matter what people think. Um, and it can be hard, especially. I mean, I'm a guy, and I got all the like. I'm Mexican, yet look at my skin color. I'm pasty white. Uh, so I have that privilege, and male, s- straight, cisgendered, uh, all of these things. So it's easier for me. And now I'm fairly jacked, and I've been to Oxford, and there's all these things, but I wasn't always like this. But yeah, there was always this kernel of um, just being strange, and I had no friends in kindergarten because I was weird. I was that little weird kid, and it took me a long time, but eventually people will recognize uh, who you are, what you stand for, um, and if you're truly genuine and sincere uh, with others and with yourself, then you'll be able to sleep at night and you won't have any regrets. Maybe you'll have some cringe moments. I make a lot of stupid jokes, and uh, we're like, oh, well, did he say that? It's like, well, yes, in an effort to make people laugh, um, and those times I was like, oh, you know. But at the end of the day, I could go to bed and not wake up tomorrow, and I would be completely. There would be um, nothing that I would say. Well, there are some things that I would change. Obviously, we all have. Um, but in the grand scheme of things, there's no guilt eating me up. There is of not making it home to see my dad before he died, but I couldn't do anything about it. There's nothing that I could have done that I can say um, I haven't apologized, or I haven't um, done my best to make it right, and not only to others but to myself. Um, and that's so valuable, to be at peace with this, even though I'm anxious as hell about the world and the future and everything. But truly, to be at peace, and I think the only way is um, to be true to yourself, and to try your best to be true to other people. Um, and it doesn't matter, like shiny shit you don't need with money you don't have, working a shit job that you hate. Do something that you truly love. Again, this is coming from a position of privilege, and sometimes it's impossible. But I think people should try. And again, it's easy for me to say, um, or at least have that idea, that kernel of hope and um, I guess belief against all odds. Maybe it can happen. Maybe it doesn't. Um, but if you tried, you can be uh, sure that you gave it a go, and that again, if you go to bed and you don't wake up the next day, that you will go with no baggage. Um, yeah, I think that's.
That's that is a depth I didn't even. Wow. No, no, that's I don't have anything to add to that. That's beautiful, and I think that that sort of rounds out. I think the episode. That was there's a lot there. I don't want to taint it by like adding anything. That's beautiful. I
Thank you,
think
thank you.
there's you have to come on again,
Yeah,
100%. That now it's obligatory.
yes, yeah, yeah. Just just
We need to
just
go
tell me,
deeper.
and I'll come on again. We can talk about other things, shit that makes me angry.
We'll have the angry episode.
Metal. Oh man, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
This was very philosophical, very political, but
But it's always interesting and
yeah,
hopefully always authentic. So,
yes.
I mean, yeah. No, no, this was so, so cool. And thank you. I feel honored to have
Wow.
I don't know. This is
That's the thing
no, no,
that
no.
they can say.
I
Like
mean it. I mean
people
it.
say that, and I'm like,
Well,
nah, nah, no, dude. This is like,
okay, maybe not. Okay, not honored. Let me put it better. I feel like this was a really positive experience that um, was very cool.
I'm glad.
There we go.
I'm glad.
Uh, No,
Thank you for having me, and let
no,
me know
thank
when
you
it comes
for
out.
coming on.
Also, where can I listen to the others? Because I didn't even know you had a podcast until
Okay,
you
so there we, there we go. There we go. We got that strong marketing game.
plug your podcast on your own podcast.
So, yeah, so if you're listening to this, you can find this on
Uh
Spotify
huh.
at OxPod Conversations with Students at the University of Oxford. We were initially also on Google Podcasts and Apple Podcasts. I'm not sure if we're going to keep branching out to the other platforms. If enough people say that they don't like, because I know that Spotify is a bit restrictive
Mm.
in the way that you have to upload video podcasts separately to them,
Mm.
and they have a closed platform. So it might be good to just have
We're on
a
YouTube.
backup on other platforms. Yeah, on YouTube. That's not a bad idea. But that's where you can find this very same podcast that you've now been
Oh,
on. Do you have any projects, any social stuff, anything you want to plug?
nah, nah.
Raspberries and
Just
milk.
the philosophy, you know. Yeah.
No, that's so cool. I think this is in stark contrast to many interviews with Oxford students. Often it will be the PPEists, and
Oh,
I mean, power to them. That's a wild degree and it's a wild life. Someone has to go do
I'll
politics.
reserve
Power
judgment.
to them. Power to power. Well, I mean, whether or not I say power to them, they're going to get it. So good for them. But I feel like this is in stark contrast to that. No, that's
Yeah. Hopefully, this will be the most listened.
I feel somewhat. Sorry, go
Oh
ahead.
no, I was going to say hopefully this will be the popular episode, the breakout, if you will. We've already broken out, and I didn't even know.
It's, I don't know. I'm glad that I started doing this. There's a long story to it, and I'll get around to it someday. But
We need a behind the
it's
scenes
incredible
pod
because
at one point. Just you monologuing.
but everybody has this wild story of how they got to Oxford because I don't think it's not something that happens by accident. There's definitely maybe elements of providence, destiny, fate, and synchronicity, but behind it all is some wild desire to do something fascinating, and you definitely fit that bill. So yeah. No, and I want to find and let me know how your wild projects go when it comes time to do the tram revolution.
Hell
Then
yeah!
I'll be
Oh
here
my
for it. Yeah,
yes. I
we're gonna
need
do it.
5 more years so that I can get the settlement, citizenship, and then yeah,
You, well, I mean, those walking proteins. I've seen that
yeah.
footage of those
Yeah.
molecules that
So
look like a
those
pair of legs.
that was it was a model. It wasn't the modeling the movement. It was a model of how they interacted with one another and how they formed coherent masses that would move, which has been shown experimentally.
What we could do is then just scale up those proteins, and that will be public transport. We just need to get a gigantic molecule that's orders of magnitude larger than it usually is. The physics will carry
Bro,
over. Don't worry, it will have
you're
to.
developing
And then
tires. Because like a single well, rubber it can be a single molecule. So it's like one of those big tires. That's one molecule.
oh,
Yeah, I
well,
mean
well,
there could be
or
more, but it's
I
probably
want a
one.
car that's on legs. I want a car that has
A
a
what?
pair of legs that just and the steering wheel if you turn it too fast then the whole thing just trips over,
Oh no.
but it's just the chassis of a car and then it Usain bolts off into the distance, and then you have to buy it new sneakers.
Oh
You can
yes, of
buy
course.
Nike Air Pumps. I should shut up before someone does that. Buying Nike Air Pumps for your walking car, that could be decent.
Oh
That could be
man.
decent.
And then you can feed the treadmill. Keep feeding the
um,
capitalist beast.
it's it's wild. Well, there's a beautiful analogy that Dave Chappelle has because he, quite famously walked away from a $50 million
Mm.
deal on the most popular TV show in history. He was in his 20s. He was a young father, and so he had every reason to stay. And yet as he was filming, he says, and it's my hobby to find old footage and documentaries and interviews and whatever with him in it. He says that he was doing socially dangerous skits, and in the filming crew, he saw that some of the people were not laughing with him, but it was a mean laugh of
Oh yeah,
laughing at
yeah.
him.
I heard.
And then the producers as well began to really exploit him in the worst ways, and then he just walked away from it. And then reflecting on it later, he said that there's this tribe of hunters, I think in West Africa, and to get water, they'll get a. This is all his analogy.
The
To get
baboon
water,
they
they'll get a
feed him.
monkey.
Yeah,
They get the hole, they put the salt in it. The monkey grabs the salt, and to be free, all it has to do is let go of the salt. But he doesn't want it, but it wants the salt. And then it sits there, and then the hunter ties the monkey to a tree, and then it gets learned helplessness because it's just sort of at first it's not happy being tied up, but then it just sort of gets used to it, and then it eats the salt. It's finally got the salt, got what it wanted. At what cost? But it's in captivity now, but it eats the salt, and then it's thirsty. So the hunter lets go of the rope, and then the monkey runs off and finds water, and then the hunter follows it, and then the hunter drinks water. And then Chappelle says in that analogy, doing the Chappelle show, he was the monkey.
yeah.
And letting go of the salt is hard. It's hard to let go of the salt, just like it's a bad idea to pick up the soap. Those are slightly different situations, but
Could be a
but
good
no,
idea
you got to let.
depending on what you like.
That could be a power move, asserting dominance by just getting a whole tub of soap things and just dumping them on the floor and picking them up one by one while making full blown eye contact.
Now we're getting into dangerous territory. Oh, the producer, the
Here we
producer.
are. Yeah, we're actually. I think someone's coming in to grab to give me some salt or something. There's
To
there's
give you
there's a
some
hubbub.
salt.
Some soapy salt.
Uh,
Some salty soap.
no,
No, but this is very very cool. Thank you again,
thank
and
you for having me.
come back come back to
Yes.
the OxPod.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
You tell me when,
yeah.
and I'll do it.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much.
Cool.
All right, take it easy, everyone.
See you guys.